very pleased to introduce Greg Story, President of Dale Carnegie. He's been one of the leading lights in the foreign business community for many years. Originally came to Japan just for 2 years, I think, and ended up staying here so far for 28. He's been chairman of the Australian-New Zealand Chamber. He's originally Australian himself, and has been head of National Australia Bank, as well as of Shinsei Bank, and now president of Dale Carnegie. He will give us a very exciting, interesting, and useful lecture on business plans. So with that, I hand over to Greg Story. Please give him a big hand.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate that introduction, and great to see everyone. I have to say that one of the highlights of my year is coming here to JMEC and giving this talk. And the second highlight is coming back in May and giving you a talk on how to present your business plan. So today we're going to look at how to start from scratch, start from zero, and get a plan going very, very quickly. And then later, having done all that, how to then present it to the judges, because the presentation component in the scoring is very high. And so you can do a fantastic job on the business plan and be beaten at the very end by someone doing a better presentation than you. So both items are very important, and I have the very happy task of dealing with both. So we're going to begin. And of course, a brilliant performance begins with confidence. And so as you begin from the start of the business planning process, you need to be confident this is going to work. What I'm going to show you does work. It is very quick. This is the key point. It is very, very fast. It'll help you to get into gear very, very quickly, because you don't have a lot of time, as we'll discuss in a moment. Now, I found this diagram recently. It's called the Business Model Canvas, and I thought, oh, this is just a great idea for my JMEC talk, because it actually breaks out what a company does into component parts. So you can look at a company in one go, basically, one quick look at it. And so you think about maybe your own company, and you look at the component parts. You know, for example, key activities. What does your company do? Who are the key partners? Who are the key suppliers to you? Who are the people cooperating with? Might be distribution, might be affiliates. What are your costs structures looking like? Usually it's going to be people, going to be one of your big cost structures. Rent, usually the second big cost feature. What are the key resources you have in your company? It might be people, it might be expertise, it might be some sort of technology. The value proposition, well, why would we buy your product or service? What it is about what you've got that's going to be interesting for someone as a buyer to look at that. And then customer relationship. How many customers do you have? What is the quality of the customer base? How loyal are they? How competitive are you? There are many ways of looking at this. And then the actual customers themselves. How many do you need? What sort of price point do you need to be getting from those customers? Is it going to be a low-cost item with many customers? Will it be a high-cost item with a few customers? How does that work? Revenue? How much revenue does the company make? And then looking at the channels. How do you distribute what you're doing? I met someone before who's got 120,000 items. The mind boggles on the distribution of something like that. But this, very simple, you can go and Google Business Model Canvas. It's a whole process in itself, which you don't actually need, particularly for JMEC. But as a starting point, when you come to look at your client for this project you're doing, go through this process. But a good thing to do before that, though, because I don't know, Betsy, I don't know if they actually got their clients yet, have they?
No, not yet.
Not yet, and they're not in their groups yet either, are they?
No, they.
Right, so you're not at any of those stages, but that will come very shortly. You'll be in a group, you'll have an actual client, and so before that though, start with your own organisation and map this out to give yourself a bit of a picture, an overall picture of how the business works. Because when you come to look at your client, you'll need to be looking at all of these items to see how to solve their problem, because it will not be one part in isolation. A business runs as a whole. The whole thing must be looked at one glance. And this is a great simple map, let's say called a canvas, like a painting, to look at in one go. So we'll have a look at that. Now, you don't need to take down any notes on what I'm covering here because you will receive all of this later. But what I do suggest you do is, as you're listening to me and you get ideas, make a note of that idea. When you have questions, write that question down. The things that you might want to follow up with later, so you can relax, know the information, data and detail will come to you, but try and use that thinking time. Okay, we're going to have a project. We're going to have a team. How are we going to start? What will we do? Where do we go? How can I use this? What's the first meeting going to look like? Okay, that's the sort of approach you need to take. So, for today we're going to look at defining the problem, coming up with a hypothesis on the problem immediately, and then look how we're going to structure the process, look at the research, aspects of the research, how to interpret the data that we find, then how to get into implementation stage. The presentation, I'll talk a little bit about presentation because usually the document is written by a number of people. So it can be quite various in the grammar and the flow in the actual document itself before you get to presentation stage. So we've got to try and make that work. Talk a little bit about teamwork and then some common problems that come up. But as I say, you will receive this presentation, so you don't have to take down all the detail here, but things that occur to you, just make a quick note of that. So, when you get the client project, they will have a problem. Try and start by breaking that problem down to small and smaller parts. And take each of those parts and then you'll start spreading it around your group to work on who's going to tackle which part. What are the drivers of the problem? It may be lack of revenue, or it might be lack of market penetration. Why? Why aren't they making enough revenue? Why don't they have enough penetration? Start digging into the whys behind the problem. And what are the strategic implications of the problem? If it continues, what will that mean for the company? If they have a distribution issue and that continues, what does that mean for the growth of that company? Start thinking through those processes because you are probably the solution. Now you're going to come up with an idea for that company that will solve their problem. So that's what you're looking for. What do we need to go after? What's a key point we need to address in our business plan that's going to help this company? And then just check you've actually identified the real problem. Now, don't assume the client actually knows what the problem is either. Right? We think, oh, they're the client, the project client. They know what their problem is. Don't assume that. Do not assume that. They may not know what the real problem is. They may think, oh yeah, we've got a problem. That's fine. But is it really the problem? That is a very brilliant question to be asking. Also, the way these things work in companies, and I was, for 5 years, a mentor. I've been a project client myself. I've done everything but participate and judge in JMEC, basically. We had a big software company. Big software company. Company name starts with M. Wonder who that could be. And the people we were dealing with had actually very little clue about why they were doing it with JMEC. Because their boss had said, do this. But in typical boss fashion, didn't explain the why, didn't explain anything really. So they were clueless. And it was very, very hard for my project team to work out what they should be doing because there was not a lot of clarity on the part of the client. So don't assume just because they're the client, they actually know what the real problem is. Something you can add real value is finding something they haven't thought about. They might see this part of the problem, but you come at it from a different angle and you might see a completely different side to their bigger problem. That is value. Because we're all very insular in our businesses. We're in our industry, we're in our little pocket there, our little company, we're burrowing away there, busy, busy, busy. Sometimes we might miss the bigger picture, or there might be things going on we just haven't noticed. So don't assume they know it all. Be skeptical, you know. Ask good questions and go deeper. Don't accept what you're told necessarily. Dig. So we use a logic tree to try and quickly get down to the nub of the problem. So it's basically a hierarchical listing, starting with the macro view and then moving down. So a company structure, you've got the company, you've got business unit A, business unit B, business unit C. So you start to break it the business units of the business. In business unit B, they have revenue and expenditure. The revenue is coming from two parts, sales and leasing. And then sales, they're getting sales out of Asia and Europe. So very quickly through this tree, you can start getting down to some areas you might want to look at. This might be the problem. Asia may not be sufficiently invested in as a growth engine for the future that's going to impact their sales, impact their revenues, affect the whole problem. So using this type of breakout of the business units and then what they do and where they do it, you might start thinking about, well, okay, our hypothesis might be, let's look at expanding the business in Asia to grow the overall revenue bottom line. But you need to have some sort of map at the start. And that business canvas model I showed you before is a good map, and then you start to take it down another level of depth very, very quickly to try and investigate where should we be concentrating our efforts for this company. So you don't actually probably know a lot about the company yet, or maybe even the industry. But don't worry about that. With what you already know, however limited that may be, start making some assumptions about what might be the problem. All right? And start coming up with a hypothesis of what you think needs to be happening to solve that problem. Even though you have no data yet, no clear idea, start with a central hypothesis as a starting point and then test evidence against that starting point. Because what you want is trying to come up with questions to understand if actually your hypothesis is correct or not. And as you go through, you may find that, oh, this data contradicts what we thought was the actual central problem based on our hypothesis. Change your hypothesis. And keep changing it, and keep changing it, and keep changing it, and keep changing it as you get more and more clarity around what is the actual problem for the company. Now, you are time poor. This is week 2, I think. Is that right, Tom?
That's correct.
You are already behind schedule, all right? Write that down, everybody. We are behind schedule. Already, you are behind, because the great thing about JMEC is your time management skills just go right through the roof, because you're going to find there's a tremendous time pressure in JMEC. And even though you're only in week 2, you've got to be mentally, you've got to be thinking, we're already behind. So don't dilly-dally around, you've got to be thinking, we're already behind schedule, we've got to really make this baby work. And that's why the hypothesis structure is very quick for you to help you do that. So it's much more efficient to analyze facts and compare them to your central hypothesis than to spend a whole bunch of time researching data, collecting information, and then driving up a central idea out of all that. That is very, very, very slow work. This is very quick work. We have a basic idea, test against it. Basic idea, test against it. So you'll find this hypothesis method will by far be the fastest and save you the most time. So you start to look at things like an issue tree as well, okay? So based on your hypothesis, you generate some questions, you break these questions down to sub-issues, and you just keep going, sub-issue, sub-issue, sub-issue. And you lay them out in this visual progression, because it's very easy for everybody to understand. You have, I probably met 2/3 of the room this morning, I think. I noticed there are not very many native speakers of English in the people I met. Okay? So you're doing this in English. That's going to be an issue straight away around communication. So things like this, which are visual, are very easy for everyone to understand. Even though your level of English capability may differ and vary, try and get visual things happening so that there's a greater capacity for people to understand quickly. So you lay it out, and by answering the questions in the issue tree, you can very quickly test, oh, is our hypothesis valid or not? So issue. Can we increase profits through a new production process? That's the issue. Okay? So you go into sub-issues. Now, will the new production process reduce costs? Will it do that? Will it be possible? Can we actually implement it? So when we look in the implementation stage, we might say, well, actually, does it require any special skills if we have this new process? Do we have those skills? Do we need to go and get those skills? Or another issue might be, do we need special facilities? Do we need a factory? Do we need a warehouse? Do we need some production? Do we need some machinery? Do we need some particular aspect for this particular product production? So very quickly you have a central question, and then you break it down to sub-issues, 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 sub-issues. And then you give people that sub-issue. Okay, you're taking this one, you're taking this one, you're taking this one, I'll take this one. We go and investigate it and see which are the ones which are going to be the most critical to give you the data to test against that central hypothesis that you began with. Okay? That's how that works. So it's very fast. And when you're time poor like you are, you need things which are very fast. So at the beginning, you won't have much data. Right? You're just starting out. You're probably not familiar with that company, not familiar with that business, maybe not familiar with that industry, all right? Not familiar with that problem. But don't worry about that. You have experience. You are in business. You have some knowledge. Start with even just your intuition, just your feeling, instinct. Start with that and come up with a central idea and then test against it, test against it. And so your gut feeling will help you to get a start. Then, remember, this is only a starting point. You want to test against the central hypothesis, see if you can improve the hypothesis. And is it true or not? In fact, you want to fail faster. You want to find out that the data is telling you this hypothesis is not right as soon as possible. Because it's brainstorming. The faster you can find out what's not right, the faster you'll find out what is right. And that's the central piece that you want to be going with this hypothesis testing methodology. Now the structure. Now, so based on your hypothesis, you start looking at your analysis, a research plan to find data to test against your hypothesis. First of all, figure out what not to do. That actually sounds simplistic. But at the beginning, that's hard to know. It's hard to know what not to do because everything's a bit of a mist. It's a bit foggy. It's not very clear to you. But the faster you can figure out what not to do, the better. Because you'll waste a lot of time on things which are not that important. And you try and break it down into smaller parts. Then if you're starting on a research component and you realise, oh, this is not really relevant, stop it. Don't keep going with it. Go back and find something else that's more relevant. And time frames should be based around these dependencies. So we need to get this piece of information. Here's as much time as we need to get that. There's my deadline to get that done. Because you're time poor, that is so critical to have those deadlines, self-imposed deadlines, which you must follow. And do not get into analysis for analysis' sake. Now, sometimes when you find really cool data, find very fresh, interesting data, it's like, oh, this is really interesting. I'd like to study more about this. This will be really good for my job. This will be really good for my career. This will be good for my future. Forget all that. This is a competition. You're here to win, right? You're here to compete with other teams and win. If you want to study that, do it after JMEC. While you're at JMEC, stay on the plan. Have your hypothesis, get into the data, and start testing that data against the hypothesis you come up with. And let the hypothesis determine your analysis. As you go through, as you start to think about how this might work, that's where you start looking. If it's a dead end, stop it, and then find something else that's not a dead end, and go back and work on that. So, we're looking for the key drivers. What is the problem? What's driving that problem? And, you won't have the time to go into every factor in detail. You've got to start making some choices. Some things are more important than others. Some elements are going to have more relevance to solving that problem than others. concentrate on the big pieces first. Okay, go for what we call the big rocks. If you know that analogy about if you've got a beaker and you want to fill it up with rocks, you don't put the sand and the gravel in first. You put the big rocks in first, then you put the gravel, then you put the sand, and you'll get everything in there. It's the same idea. Then lastly you pour in the water. It's the same idea. Go for the big rocks first. Drill down to the core problem, go for that part. Then make sure your priorities are very clear. Based on our hypothesis, we think this is a critical issue, therefore we need to look at these particular areas. Here's the priority areas we're going to start with. Go for those. And eliminate them if they're not relevant as fast as possible and find the ones that are more relevant. So it's a continual process of hypothesis test, hypothesis test, hypothesis test, all the way through. This is very speedy for you. So we start with the big picture of the overall issue. Be careful about getting into too much detail. You might be investigating something that's a dead end. You might be getting very knowledgeable about something that's not going to be very central to fixing this problem. If you find yourself just drowning in data, stop. And just step back and say, well, what are we trying to achieve here? I'm getting all this information, but actually, is it helping me? And the collection of information by itself can be very stimulating, but is it actually helping me? Is what I'm doing moving us forward towards our goal or not? That's a really good question. Is what I'm doing moving us forward towards our goal? If it isn't, stop it and get back to something that's more helpful. And don't be tied up with precision, absolute precision at the beginning. If you get something that's basically directional and you think this is where we need to be going with it, great. So the basic scale, order of magnitude, this seems about right. That's fine. That's enough at the beginning. Don't think it's got to be absolutely microscopically perfect in every regard at the start. Big picture, then work your way down in more detail. So don't over-analyze things. Now, again, don't boil the ocean, right? Don't try and do too much. Isolate out the key points. Don't analyze it to death. You're looking for, is the hypothesis correct or not? That's all you want to test. And does it prove it or disprove it? That's all you want to know. This proves my hypothesis or it disproves it. Very simple. Now, sometimes you can't get enough data or information to actually answer the question. So you might have to triangulate out to something else which is not exactly on that topic to help you come back. For example, if it's a profitability exercise and you can't know the profitability of the competition, then you might have to go and look at market share. And then you might have to apply some rough numbers of what the industry average is for profitability and get a rough idea of how profitable they are, because you won't necessarily have access to that data if they're privately held companies. So you have to sort of go around the problem a little bit, triangulate around it, try and get as close as you can to the answer. You can't get the answer, that's okay, but get as close as you can. Directional, order of magnitude, and what are the upper and lower bounds of the market? That's what you want to know. What's the sort of, who's got the largest of the share, market share, who's got the lowest, who's got the highest profitability, who's got the lowest profitability. Get some of that scale in your analysis. And of course, it's going to take patience because you're not going to be able to even get a starting point for a hypothesis sometimes. You just won't have enough information. That's going to be very frustrating. But start with what you've got and try working with that. And then make sure you're moving forward. It's, you know, we can kill ourselves through perfection. So you don't take action because you're thinking, well, we don't have enough clear data. No, start. Don't procrastinate. Don't be a perfectionist at the beginning. Stop worrying. Just do it. Start. Because in that starting, you will begin to uncover information, which will then help you to improve that hypothesis and lead you to more information and to better analysis later. But if you're just frozen, thinking, oh, well, we're going to spend all that time looking around for some data somewhere, you've got some instinct, you've got some basic idea about business. Use that as your starting point and work out your hypothesis and start looking for where are the facts, where's the data points we need to get, and then go and find them and then check against that hypothesis. So it's a very rough process in the beginning, but then it becomes more and more refined as you go through. Now, it's very innocent at JMEC. People come in JMEC thinking, well, I'm working in the finance part of the business. I'm sick of finance. I'm going to join JMEC and I'm going to do marketing because I want to be a marketer, right? Or the other way around. Someone who's in marketing says, I want to do the numbers so I can learn about finance, you know, or accounting or something. Forget that. If you want to win, forget that. Forget it. You will not win. No way you will win, because the team who's looking at their composition of their people and saying, who is the expert in the key areas, and allocating the expert to the key area will win. They will kill you in the morning, they will kill you in the middle of the day, and they'll kill you at night, because they'll just be so much quicker and more efficient than you are. In the overall process of putting this business plan together, yes, you will get exposure to the whole picture. When I was mentoring some of the teams, we had this problem. I don't want to do that, I'm going to do something. I'm the marketing guy, I want to do the finance. You know, disaster. So, presume not everybody will deliver on time, okay, and at the agreed level. You get sick. You get sent on a trip for business. Your cat dies. Any number of things, disasters can hit you. But you need someone to keep you on track. You know, you need someone like the managing partner. You know, in legal firms, they're all equal, but one is the managing partner of the legal firm. In accounting firms, they're all equal, but one is the managing partner. If you can find a managing partner in your group who looks to be a very close blood relative of Genghis Khan, that would be good. Okay? Someone who's going to really keep everybody in line and make sure that those targets get done when they should be done. That will be helpful. I had two groups out of the 5 years I did mentoring. I had 2 years in a row we won the competition. The third group, the last group, absolute disaster. It's just unbelievable meltdown. And that killed my career as a mentor, right there. I'm still having therapy to get over it. Now, are there any French people in the room? Well, no one's going to admit it. Okay. Never forget the French connection, is a note to myself here. In that disaster group, and we were down at the end to 3 people. 3 people at the end. It was a nightmare. This French person, let's just call him Michel, because that was his name. He was a marketing guy. And guess what? He wanted to be the numbers guy, because he wanted to learn about the numbers. That's okay, I thought. Well, guess what? About 4 weeks, 5 weeks out from the end of the submission date, Michelle silently withdraws from JMEC. Doesn't tell anybody, just disappears. So you know what it's like, you can't always meet because you know this and that, and you're emailing each other, and they're emailing Michelle how the number's going, not getting an answer back, you know, trying to ring him, can't get through. He'd actually dropped out, but didn't bother to tell anybody that he dropped out. So these poor people who are left are struggling on, thinking that the finance component is being done in the background. It wasn't being done. Right? So the person who should have taken the lead, the most logical leader of that particular group, said, I always do the leading at work, I'm always the head of the project team, I don't want to be the head of the project team for this team. Disaster, there was no lead. You know? So you should really look at your team and allocate skills exactly where you have got the best skill match for what you need to do. And the person who should be the most logical leader should lead. And they're the person who's going to say, we'll meet at Starbucks and have our first meeting. I think we should do this. The big, pushy, bossy Genghis Khan lookalike, right? That's the one you want as the leader, because you need someone to hold everyone else accountable. And the natural leaders will emerge because they'll want to take over, right? Let them take over, okay? Don't fight it. I want to be the leader this time. Forget that. let them lead. You'll find your speciality, concentrate on that, and you will win if you do that. If you don't do that, it'll be a meltdown. Trust me, I've been there. It's not pretty. Now, as I said before, for each issue and sub-issue, start listing them up. Have your initial hypothesis, what you need to do for the analysis, what sort of data you require, where are you going to find this data, and get it down on paper. As I said before, we've got a very multicultural, multilingual group. Getting stuff on paper becomes very, very important, because what you assume we're talking about orally may not be understood in the same way by everybody. Use documentation. Get it on paper. There are documents you can share. Google Word docs are these things you can share very easily now, so everyone's very clear what's going on. So start mapping that process out. So a brief description of the likely end product of each analysis. So we are going to analyse something. This is what we expect to find. Nominate what that is. So it's very clear what you're looking for, because once you start doing the data research, you can find out massive amounts of data. You start doing stuff on search engines, and my God, everything comes up. And then you spend hours trailing through all this stuff, and you get, oh, that looks interesting, tangent. Oh, that looks interesting, tangent. And next thing you know, 4 hours have gone by, you've done nothing. You've got nothing to show for it. You've got to be very disciplined. You've got to say, what I'm expecting to find from this analysis is this. And if you don't find it on that site, forget that site, try and find another site where you can locate what you need. And then who will be responsible? Allocate. Genghis Khan will allocate. You're doing that. You're doing that. You're doing that. So it's very clear where the accountability is. And as I said, have a due date for each product of that research, so you know when it's due. Like, if someone suddenly goes a bit quiet, even if they're not French, and the name's not Michelle, start worrying, okay? Start assuming the worst, because I can tell you what, if we had picked that up weeks earlier, we could have done something about it. This group, on the Sunday of submission, was still writing the document. Think about that. It was an absolute nightmare. Anyway, so look at those aspects. Where we might get some data. Annual reports of companies are incredibly valuable. They're always trying to schmooze the finance sector, institutional investors, and individual investors to give them money. So they have truckloads of data that's really useful in the annual reports. And they have things like, this is our strategy. Very useful stuff. And the president will have a nice photograph there with a sort of glossy background, looking sort of Napoleon-like, and talk about all these really critical issues to the business. And so will their competitors. How helpful is that? Their competitors may be doing something that's going to trigger something in your mind that you might want to make a suggestion to your project client that they should be doing. Right? Because again, we get wrapped up in our little world. We've all got 400 million emails in our email inbox. We've always got projects coming out of our ears. We're all busy, we're all locked down, and we sometimes don't come up and look around enough to see what's going on around us, and we miss things. And companies do not monitor their competitors to that degree of detail usually, because they're all just too busy. So you're free and independent. So you might want to look at others in the industry and what they're doing for hints on what your own project client will be doing, and the annual reports are very good for that. And you look for the outliers. You look for the things that look a bit different. For ratios or key measures, per head sales by region. If there's like Fukuoka is off the chart in sales compared to everywhere else. Wow, interesting. What are they doing in Fukuoka that's different, that might be applicable in Sapporo or Tokyo or Osaka or wherever else? Look for those things that strike you as being a bit different, because they're that bit good or excuse me, good or bad. Excuse me. Keep reading. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, high and low performers. And best practices is very good. Now, often facts will compensate for lack of expertise in that area. It's generally going to be an industry that you're probably not familiar with. So you've got to try and find some data that's going to help you to get some insight into that whole area. Interviews are terrific. Much better than pouring through websites. Much better. If you can find, you've got the client company, you've got the competitors. And when you go to the competitor, you say, hello, I'm from JMEC. I'm doing a research project so I can kill you in the market by helping your competitor to just wipe you out. Probably not a good approach. Maybe something like, I'm doing market research for a project. I would like to find out something about what your company does in a very neutral fashion. Okay. They will also help with secondary data because they will know where the information is. So rather than you go and trying to find it yourself, if you find someone in that industry, even if it may not be necessarily a direct competitor, but someone still in the industry, a slightly different area, they will probably know. Well, you should look at this. Oh, you should look at that. Oh, save so much time. Oh, this is a great website. This is a great portal. Government documents will show you data on this. Go and get the white paper on such and such. Wow, great. And well, who are the people you need to speak to? It could be competitors, it could be vendors. People who are supplying your client project company. Go and talk to the people who supply them. Guess who else they supply? Your project client's competitors. Hello? They're going to have a terrific amount of insight and they're not going to feel any particular competitive problem about talking with you. Recent departures. A person might have gotten a promotion or they might have gotten moved to company. They will still have a lot of knowledge about that industry and that company and the whole business. And they're free in some ways to talk. Could be part-timers. Could be people only work there, a limited amount of time, but they still have got insight. It could be distributors. In the distribution chain of command, there might be people there who are at the wholesale level, the retail level, who can give you good information to help you to know where to start looking. So don't be afraid to think out of the box about potential interviewees. And interviewees, my God, that's so quick. It is so fast. You are time poor, I mentioned earlier. This is a great place to start. First, and then start looking for data. Think of it that way. You might only have a basic hypothesis, but this will help you to get a much clearer hypothesis very, very quickly. So think about that. When you do the interview guide, don't save up the killer question to the end. You know why that doesn't work? You sort of, putting the soft questions out first, killer questions coming at the end. The assistant comes in with a note. Sorry, I've got to go. The phone rings. Oh, sorry, I've got to take this call. It's from my boss. End of the interview. Put your killer question up the front. Put your second killer question second on the list, etc., etc. Don't assume Christmas is going to come on the 25th, You've got to get Christmas early because people are busy. And get your thoughts on paper, send the questions first. Now, they may not read them. It may just be another email in a tsunami of emails, right? That's just killing everybody. That's okay. But they might, on the day, just print out a quick look at it. Then you've got their brain thinking. So you're speeding them up. It's also helping you, showing you're a professional, you're organised, and you're thinking about the priority of what you want to know. Active listening techniques. Active listening techniques are things like sitting up straight in the chair, leaning in and nodding, oh, I see, like that, paraphrasing, to show you're really listening. Right? So they appreciate the fact you're taking what they're saying seriously and you're listening, as opposed to slumping in a chair, sitting back, looking like you're going to go to sleep. No, don't do that. And keep the interview on track. Now, I would be a nightmare to interview. Absolute nightmare. I am so interested in so many things. And I love to talk. I love to talk about all sorts of interesting conversations. And I will take the conversation on a massive tangent away from what you're interested in every opportunity. Sean and I have lunch and we cover the entire universe through all history over that 1 hour of lunch because we're so interested in so many things. Our brains are so stimulated and excited by knowledge. Well, you're going to meet people like that too, but you've got to keep it on track. You've got to get them to stop taking off on a tangent and bring it back to the central point. Because you let them just keep talking and talking and talking, ding, time's up, you're out. Right? Keep them on track. That's your job. And great question. Write this one down. This is a really good one. At the close of the interview, ask this question. Is there anything I forgot to ask? Oh, sweet, sweet question. Because we don't know much, maybe, about that industry. We don't know much about that business. And we don't know what we don't know. But when you ask this question, they will tell you. Because what they'll be saying is, I'm answering your questions, I'm being polite, but they're not going to do your job for you. When you ask this question, they will suddenly say, well, actually, no, you didn't ask me about blah, blah. And then blah, blah turns out to be the really critical issue of the whole thing. And you go, oh, gee, wow. You might have to come back and see them again. Seriously, they may have no time that day, but they might unearth something and go, wow, I needed a lot more about that. And come back and see them. And also, always send them a thank you note. Okay? That's very polite and very professional. So you need in your interview good structure. Good structure. How are you going to ask questions? What's the order? And don't forget that one at the end. So now we've got all the data. What's relevant? What's proving or disproving our hypothesis? And start weeding it out. This is in or out, in or out. Now the 80-20 rule tells you that, Pareto principle, that basically, 80% of the effect on the study will be generated by 20% of the stuff you're analysing. 20% of the data will affect 80% of your analysis, basically. 80% of the sales comes from 20% of the customers. There's always this 80-20 rule for everything, basically. 20% of the staff generate 80% of the profit. Okay. Now, clients will pay for advice that is value to their business. They're paying for you to be a consultant to them. They're looking for value. The value is in the 20%. It's not in the 80%. The value is in that key 20% of critical factors in that business. Critical factors around solving their problem. Now, when you take the 80% of the 80%, right? And we start, doing the 20% of the 80%, I should say. You find that 4% of what we do accounts for 64% of the results. So even take it to the next level, right? Break it down once again, then you've got 4% of the data will tell you 64% of what you need to know. But which 4% is it? That's the point, right? That's where we've got to dig in and check, dig in and check, dig in and check. So again, you can't do everything, but you can do the most important things. Allocate the time to make sure that is what you are doing. And look for the really key parts and concentrate on those and ignore the rest. Because once you get the really key parts, you're answering the big high value questions, that's what the client will feel they're getting their value from. So if 80% of the sales come from 20% of the customers, well, what are those 20% of customers doing? And then how can the other 80% become more effective? Right? So you concentrate on those 20% of buyers. What are they doing? Yeah. Do you really need to study the whole of the 80% who are not buying as much? Don't bother about it. Go for the high value 20%. If, as you're working through each day, try and have your own notebook, and for each day that you're working on your JMEC project, you say, what are the 3 most important things I learned today? And note those down, because you will just get busy. You'll have a lot of stuff going on. You need a little bit of self-reflection. You need a little bit of accountability about your effort each day that you're working on your JMEC project. Okay, I did X amount of work on JMEC today, or tonight. well, okay, what were the 3 most important things I learned from what I did today? And if you can't write anything down, what have you been doing? You've been wasting your time. So something's wrong with your approach. Something's wrong with where you're focused, and you're probably not focused on the right 20% of where the key items are. And don't make the facts fit your hypothesis, okay? Don't do it from that direction. It has to be real. Because remember, if the client acts on your recommendation, it could cost them a lot of money if it goes wrong. And that's distinctly possible, depending on what the industry or business you're looking at. So, the 80-20 rule prompts you to ask new questions and could even take you into new analysis. As I said before, don't assume that they actually know what the real problem is. Because the person who's contracted with JMEC may come from a particular section of the business. And they may have a particular view of where the problem in the business is located. But that may not necessarily be the case. It may be somewhere else in the business that they're not seeing or they're not aware of. You could help them there.